So here he is. He's some kind of vague military strategy advisor to President Zelensky. And in the 40-second Russian pair of clips with English subtitles, you will see him in 2 studio settings from the last couple of years saying how much he admires ISIS and how they have got the torture and menacing of people via media aggrandizement down to a fine art, and that they are the force of the future because of what they do. And of course, many of these guys have now come into the Ukraine. So let's have a look, and if you're watching in video, you'll see the subtitles of 2 clips totaling 40 seconds in which the advisor to the president on security matters, Arestovich, makes these claims.
Руководители считаются сейчас одними из наиболее мудрых и удачливых стратегов, которые есть. Все рассчитано до максимально точно, даже жестокость показная должна была производить определенное воздействие. Это бесчеловечная абсолютно стратегия, но очень высокого уровня, очень мудрая, с учетом конкретных интересов. Они очень правильно действуют. Есть большая книга, где проанализировано ИГИЛ хорошо, и там видно, что они применяют передовые методы хозяйства, а не передовые методы управления, на самом деле.
Терроризм такой.
Те, в которых нуждается весь мир. А параллельно это является терроризм, средневековая жестокость, сжигание людей, там, расстрелы, отрезание голов и так далее, и так далее. И это абсолютно сетевая структура из будущего.
And noteworthy is that in both of these clips, Alexander Arestovich is actually speaking Russian. He was brought up in Soviet Georgia, and he's speaking for an international audience here, not to his own cheerleaders. He's actually saying to the whole of the former Soviet world, and probably broadcasting that this should be used in other conflict zones in the former Soviet Union. If you want to get ahead, the thing to do is to set up an absolutely brutal torture and slaughter media factory, as has been mastered by Daesh. And he says that this is a horrible strategy, but it's very wise and far-sighted. I suppose we'd better ask Vanessa for an analysis of that, because
I do want to do that, Alex. But before we do that, I just want to mention this, because I was sent through a piece of video this morning, and it is unverified. But the piece of text that went with it said this: the whole. I'm not going to show the video because it is frankly extremely gruesome. But the text went like this: the whole world must see this footage, so they realize that it's not a war between Russia and Ukraine, which is supported by the NATO countries, but the war between good and evil. In this video, Ukrainian soldiers shoot Russian prisoners of war in the legs and afterwards give them a severe beating. At the beginning of this video, there are Russian prisoners of war lying on the ground with bullet wounds in their legs. Some of them have got leg bones broken. It might give the impression that the Russian military were captured having been wounded, but that was not the case. At the end of the video, we can see Ukrainian soldiers shooting all the newly arrived prisoners through their legs. Many of them are dying from shock due to the pain right on camera, and all of this is being filmed by Ukrainian soldiers themselves. They've been treating the captured Donbass defenders the same way throughout these past 8 years. And Alex, that seems to fit very well with what you have just shown.
Yes, and we're deliberately not showing the gruesome stuff. I'm not on my Telegram channel either, but some of it does reach me, and there's a whole bulk of it that now is verifiable because it tallies with place, time, dialogue, and the like. And it does seem that a lot of Russian POWs on arrival at processing facilities are handcuffed, and you'll know this from the Northern Irish Troubles, that in the past the so-called gentlemanly way of kneecapping somebody was to hitch their trousers up to prevent gangrene setting in, but that isn't even done to these Russians. They're expected to die on the spot, and if they survive, of course, they will lose their limbs to gangrene because uniform fragments will have gone into the leg wounds, but they're using assault rifles to shatter the tibia and fibula. It's I haven't seen anything like it, even from the so-called religious wars in the former Soviet Union, where you've got a jihadi element. I haven't seen this element of brutality, and this is Slav on Slav.
Okay, well, let's welcome Vanessa Bealey to the program. Vanessa, have you got any thoughts on what Alex has just presented?
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately saw that video, and I've seen a number of others, and I've also been given a number of channels of some of the Azov battalion commanders, etc., and the channels are full of this kind of torture and humiliation process, not only against captured Russian soldiers, which of course is in violation of all kind of Geneva Convention on the treatment of prisoners of war. I believe I've seen information sort of circulating that the perpetrators of those crimes against those Russian POWs have now been captured by the Spetsnaz forces, and I'm sure they will be dealt with accordingly. But the thing is, through the 10 years of war against Syria, we saw multiple videos like this, very, very similar. Very similar. If you remember, in 2016, the beheading of the 12-year-old child Abdullah Isa, which was another gruesome element. ISIS were almost gentlemanly in comparison to what we're seeing from these Azov and Aidar battalions, the fascist and far-right and ultra-nationalist Nazi battalions in Ukraine. I would say not the ISIS were clean compared to what we're seeing surfacing now from inside Ukraine.
Yes.
I think, Vanessa, I'd just add to that last night I watched a BBC clip where the BBC simply attempting to apologise for the neo-Nazi battalions, downplaying it, quite obscene production by the BBC as they attempt to spin this narrative.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's put this on screen then. This is Ukraine's propaganda wars is the headline. International PR firms, DC lobbyists, and CIA cutouts. This is an article in Mid-Press published a few days ago by Dan Cohen. And so he begins by saying, to bolster the perception of Ukrainian military mettle, Kiev has churned out a steady stream of sophisticated propaganda aimed at stirring public and official support from Western countries. The campaign includes language guides, key messages, and hundreds of propaganda posters, some of which contain fascist imagery and even praise neo-Nazi leaders. Ukraine's propaganda strategy earned it praise from NATO commander, who told the Washington Post they are really excellent in Stratcom, media, info ops, and also psyops. And the Washington Post said in their report here that Western officials say that while they cannot independently verify much of the information that Kiev puts out about the evolving battlefield situation, including casualty figures for both sides, it nonetheless represents highly effective Stratcom. Then, according to PR Week, also highlighted in the article on Mint Press, the headline in PR Week is Global PR Community Rallies to Help Ukraine Government Comms. And so this initiative, this propaganda initiative, was launched by an anonymous figure who founded a Ukraine-based public relations firm. So this article says, from the first hour of war, we decided to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to help them distribute the official sources to show the truth. This unnamed person said, this is a hybrid war, the mix of bloodily struggling fight and huge disinformation and fake campaign led by Russia is what they're attempting to say. So who is actually behind it? Well, in fact, this organization, according to the Mint Press article, the PR Network, so this is a British organization set up by Nikki Roganozzi and Francis Ingham. And Francis Ingham, of course, previously worked for the Conservative Party, and he sits on the UK Government Communication Service Strategy and Evaluation Council, and he's chief executive of the International Communications Consultancy Organisation and leads the membership body for UK Local Government Communications, which is called LG Comms. So it looks like a lot of this propaganda, this pro-Ukrainian propaganda, coming out from the UK. And again, as no doubt Vanessa will remind us in a second, we saw the same type of thing in Syria. So let's put Provoke Media on, and the headline on this is Global PR Industry Pledges Communications Support for Ukraine. So they are basically saying that there was a dossier, yes, well, they're talking about the Snake Island incident, of course, but unfortunately, as this came on from CNN, had to admit the Snake Island incident wasn't actually true. So a lot of this propaganda came from these PR companies through the mainstream media, where we got the "go F yourself" statement from the people dying on the island, apparently, but then it turned out that they were alive and well afterwards, as acknowledged by CNN here, and so on. And so where does that take us? It takes us to this publication, MacPaw, and the truth about Russian attack on Ukraine. And I'm not really interested in what this article says, other than it does list some of the recommended, some of the approved media outlets. So if we put a few of these on screen, first of all, we've got sources in Russian, and this includes Novaya Gazeta, that is tied to the National Endowment for Democracy. We've got Medusa on there, which is funded by the government of Latvia, the Oak Foundation, Open Society Foundation, and so on. We've got Holland Media, which is an offshoot of Medusa, and we've got BBC Russia. We've got Current Time TV, which is created by CIA funded or founded propaganda outlet Radio Free Europe, according to the Mint Press article. We've got Censor, funded by Yuri Betusov, a former advisor to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and so on. And then we've got the sources in English, and unsurprising list on that there. So we've got Vox, we've got BBC, Politico, The Washington Post, Foreign Affairs, The Economist, CNN, and The Guardian. Vanessa, this perhaps is no surprise that we are seeing. I mean, it is a first-rate article in Mint Press, but it's no surprise, the content.
I mean, if you go back to the UK Foreign Office document leak, of course, showing the millions that the UK Foreign Office and intelligence agencies were spending on funding outreach agencies like ARC Group, headed up by Alistair Harris, and who employed James Le Mesurier to create the White Helmets and the Free Syrian Police. But to do exactly this, to run Stratcom operations and to provide media support or sort of whitewashing for the various armed groups, extremist armed groups inside Syria. And so now you have what I call the Fash-washing Brigade, headed up by the UK, to provide the same media support for the Nazis. And I was just talking before we came on about a headline today in The Guardian, which effectively says the Azov brigades are nothing more than Ukrainian patriots fighting the real Nazis, meaning Russia. So that's how The Guardian is spinning it. And that obviously is what they're being told to do right now, is to spin the narrative, switch it round to Russia being the Nazi fascist force invading Ukraine, and the Azov being nothing more than slightly right-wing patriots defending their nation state.
Yes. Now, on Friday, we put this on screen because the UK government had been tweeting it out, exposed Russian spy agency behind cyber incidents, and we quoted Liz Truss saying Russia's targeting of critical national infrastructure is calculated and dangerous. It shows Putin is prepared to risk lives to sow division and confusion amongst allies. And the point we were making was that, of course, cyber is very much front and center of the new Ministry of Defence integrated operating concept. And we were making the point that this integrated operating concept is offensive rather than defensive. But Vanessa, you came across one person in particular, and we thought we should run through a little bit, just give people a little bit of information about this guy, because he is Ukrainian, but he seems to be working for Microsoft. And the question is, are the cyber activities that he's involved in defensive or offensive?
Yeah, and of course Ben Wallace and his Vovan and Luxus prank call, which he supposedly hung up on immediately, he talks about going on the offence in the cyber war also, as opposed to defensive. So this was really interesting. This guy was actually brought to my attention by the commander of the Christian Orthodox Syrian National Defense Forces in the northern Hama town of Al-Skalbiya. He brought it up, and we'll come on to that in a few minutes, because this guy was issuing death threats against the members of those national defense forces. And of course we are seeing these attacks against particularly Russian-speaking Christian Orthodox. There was a video of an Orthodox priest being dragged out of a church, I can't remember exactly where it was, and being kidnapped by the Ukrainian forces. So there is now this backlash against Russian Orthodox in Ukraine. So basically I was sent it because he was issuing threats against Russian Orthodox Christians inside Syria. But when I actually looked, and this was his pinned post, he talks about his company and its entire staff work around the clock in the service of Ukraine, offering cybersecurity support services without any government funding. But then he mentions that as the UK provided support to Ukraine through our company, now I still don't know whether this means through Microsoft or whether it means he has established a side company to receive whatever support the UK is providing. And he then goes on to talk about the fact that he and his partner have donated 2 million to help cybersecurity, and then glory to Ukraine. But of course, this is the Facebook translation. It's Slava Ukrainia and death to Putin. So here is a guy who is effectively signaling Nazi affiliation, working for Microsoft as, if we go on, we then, this is his Facebook page, this is the header, his profile picture is a picture of Bill Gates. I'm not quite sure who that is in the background, maybe Michael or Alex can tell me. And if we then go to his LinkedIn profile, he is a senior security analyst with Microsoft, or consultant rather.
Yes. Yeah, it's on screen.
Yeah, sorry. Now, this guy was educated in Odessa, then in Munich. He was born in 1987, but he ended up, and I'm not quite sure how, at Harvard University, where he studied information security and computer forensics. Now, while he's talking about cyber security, his actual main focus is on cyber warfare, and I'll come on to another slide in a minute where he talks about infiltrating or hacking the FSB, the security services in Russia. He has apparently shut down ATMs in Russia, etc. So he's obviously waging a hacking war against Russia. But he's also connected to and supporting of the terrorists in Syria. So again, we have this connection between the Ukrainian Nazi battalions and the terrorist groups inside Syria. So he's talking here about supporting the Free Syrians, but of course in Idlib that means those that are dominated by Al-Qaeda. Free Syrians. And then he also, this is where he is threatening Nabil al-Abdullah, who is, as he describes, the dog of the lion, which of course means President Assad, and of the Russians. As I say, this is a translation. I think this was in Arabic. So he then goes on to say that if Nabil al-Abdullah comes to fight in Ukraine, he will make sure that he's dispatched. And I think in another post he describes him as being sent to join Hafiz al-Assad. So here we have someone that is extremely fanatic, extremist in his language. But now the other interesting thing, on the 6th of March he talks about deliveries underway for the heroes of the Ukrainian army. And here we have these scopes are fabricated by an organization or a factory in Czechoslovakia, which is EU funded. Zahori Trade, and the brand is the Night Pearl scopes. Of course, they say that they manufacture for defense departments of various nations in the EU, but also they sort of promote the hunting aspect of their work, but these are obviously being brought in as military and defense. He then also describes receiving the Covertus made. Covertus is an organization, a factory again in Kiev, the drone jammer anti-drone KVSG-6. So this guy is clearly being used to funnel weapons in to the Ukrainian forces. I haven't yet sort of seen exactly how he's bringing them in. But if we then, if we look at his Facebook page, he has a number of images which clearly show his affiliations: anti-Russia, pro-Nazi, pro-terrorist in Syria. He talks about various operations. For example, here he's talking about secret information leaked with the names of Russian intelligence officers in the FSB involved in criminal activities in Europe. And he says soon a list of the names of all the terrorist groups from the foreigners dealing or supporting the Russian invasion of Ukraine will be published. So he's obviously issuing threats against anyone that dares to show support for the Russian campaign or is against the Nazi elements fighting inside Ukraine. But the interesting thing here, Mike, and we talked about it the other day, is when I was looking into this guy, and it's very difficult to find a lot of information on him, which immediately makes me slightly suspicious. I'd like Alex's opinion on this. But oddly, on the 1st of November 2021, and he's the sole director of this company, he established a company called iHerb.com. Now, iHerb, most people will know this is
Vanessa,
yeah.
just let me interrupt you here for 1 second.
Yeah.
So let's put this filing details on screen at the moment, because he has set up a company called iHerb.com Limited, and as you say, 1st of November 2021. I've got a couple of other little graphics here. So here is him as the director from Companies House here for iHerb.com Limited. And you can see that it's Covent Garden, London is the registered address. He's a director, but you can see quite clearly on screen there that he is Ukrainian nationality and country of residence is Ukraine. And when you look at what it does, the nature of the business is set to wholesale of coffee, tea, cocoa and spices, wholesale of perfume and cosmetics, wholesale of pharmaceutical goods, retail sale via mail order houses or via internet. Now, it's very interesting that iHerb.com is an established website. It's been established for 25 years. This is what it looks like. But if you look at the bottom of that page, it shows that iHerb.com is copyright 1997 to 2022 iHerb LLC. This is a US-based partnership or local limited liability corporation. So my question to you is, why do you speculate? I mean, I appreciate that it is speculation, but why do you think he has decided to name a limited company in the UK after an established .com domain-based company, mail order company that sells exactly the type of things that he lists on his Companies House registration? It's the same type of business, but he clearly has no connection to this iHerb company, and so what is he doing?
Well, and also, why would somebody who's resident in Ukraine, the companies, there's no mention of this company, and the building does appear to be empty apart from a couple of offices that have a desk and a vase of flowers on the desk or something like that. So again, we seem to be seeing what could be a front company. The fact that they will accept payment via internet, and the other company he has, which I forgot to mention in the slides, he has a cryptocurrency company in Ukraine also. So there could be a connection there. It could be that he is able to funnel the funds through this company, and of course, because it was only established in November 2021, there are no accounts filed, and we have seen this multiple times where these companies are set up and they shut down before accounts must be filed, probably because again, we're speculating, because they've served their purpose and they're shut down before accounts have to be filed, which might reveal what they're doing or might raise questions. He is also the sole director, which is interesting, and I couldn't find any information of any other employees, but very strange that a Ukrainian would have an office address in London, dealing in goods that he seems to have absolutely no relation to from his professional profile and from his education.
Have you got any thoughts, Alex?
I think we might have found a suitcase guy or analogy, because 20 years ago when the Russians were duking it out in Chechnya and just over the Georgian border in the Pankisi Gorge, that was the big casus belli just after 9/11. These ethnic Chechens in Georgia using Georgian territory as a base for rest and recuperations and restocking of jihadis. What you found then, and I actually witnessed this personally, I bumped into some of these guys, you'd find in that iteration of the war, it was a bunch of British Pakistani students. They were, in that case, mainly studying information technology and medicine, who claimed to be on a year's exchange or study program in Tbilisi, and who just happened to be enjoying camping out in the mountains. And then later on, through intelligence work, I found that this profile was quite characteristic of gentlemen who'd been tapped up in London by city gents, or at least arm's length, and who were sent out there. Well, of course, there was no UAV technology in those days, so they weren't drone jamming, but they were suitcase guys in the sense that they were tapping Russian satellite phones in the region and jamming them as well sometimes, because some of the figures, including Johar Dudayev, were assassinated by the Russians getting a lock on their sat phone signal. So this is all very redolent of that. The surname of this gentleman, Al-Fayoumi, indicates, I think, Egyptian ancestry, not necessarily in his generation, because Fayoum is a city in Lower Egypt, but the orthography is French Levantine, so his family may have spent some time in Syria or Lebanon. But no, the address as well, Covent Garden, suggests to me a boiler room of the kind that the late Gordon Bowden specialised in unfolding, and of course Bowden often claimed that at the bottom of that trail was Mossad. So very dark stuff, but he does fit the profile for what I used to know as a suitcase guy 20 years ago, embedded with the local nutters.
Okay, thank you for that. Any thoughts?
Well, we've seen this sort of thing before. I'm going to be talking in a little bit about the BBC's information war. It's very complex. It's designed to be so that it's not easily seen for the public as to what's going on. Do we believe this sort of stuff can happen? Yes, of course.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for that, Vanessa. Let's move on to Ben Wallace. He has been mentioned already, but here he is in the Arctic because we are very concerned about the Arctic at the moment. So Ben Wallace met his Norwegian counterpart in the last day or two, and they've been taking part in an exercise called Response 22. We've mentioned this NATO exercise already. Norwegian-led exercise with 35,000 troops from 28 participant nations, and of course 6 Royal Navy ships, 2,000 UK personnel carrying out cold weather training in northern Norway. Well, what was he getting excited about? Well, he was getting excited about the launch of this, the UK's defence contribution to the High North. It's a new policy document. Well, they're saying that this strategy sets out the UK's commitments to NATO, such as increasing UK training and operations in the area. With allies and international partners, the UK will also invest in research and development to fund a sustainable and modernised defence capability in the region. As part of the new strategy, the UK will maintain a periodic Royal Navy presence in the High North. The strategy also reinforces support across its Arctic allies to preserve the stability and security of the Arctic region. But what's really behind this? Well, let's look at Ben Wallace's introduction to this. The Arctic has historically been an area of low tension, and we wish it to remain so. However, melting sea ice in the Arctic brings threats as well as opportunities. Russia is taking an increasingly militarized approach to the region, and China is supporting Russia's proposed Polar Silk Road with a range of infrastructure and capabilities that have dual-use potential. As the region becomes increasingly accessible, threats from elsewhere around the globe could spill over into the Arctic. And Alex, this whole business of dual-use potential, this is Britain's new integrated operating concept is dual-use potential. We use civilian infrastructure for military purposes. There's no indication that I'm aware of that the Russians are doing the same, but of course he tries to push that narrative. The Polar Silk Road looks like a trading route. It doesn't look like a military or a defensive or an offensive infrastructure being built there. So I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but clearly the UK government has been getting concerned about Russian activities in the polar region for quite a number of years now.
It's a great game, only it's Russia pushing northwards to evade blockades rather than southward because of a combination of, don't shoot me, but climate change, if you understand what I mean and don't mean by that, and also the stage of technology that the region has got to. The Chinese are actually building, if I understand correctly, the world's largest Arctic port in record time in Russia. The whole city can't be a weapon, can it? But dual use, as I've seen from my years in counter-proliferation, is effectively a Western stick. It's part of what's now called the rules-based international order. It's used as a term to sanction, well, first keep tabs on and then sanction trading companies and nations that in the Western parlance, Anglo-American parlance, attempt to evade blockades on weapons exports and the export of gyroscopes, for example, for nuclear programs. The whole term, whenever I've spoken to technical people, is ambiguous because anything in the world can be used for peaceful and productive or destructive purposes. And the more specialized technology it is, the more that's true generally. So it does seem to me that Britain ultimately, or the deep state, is concerned that Russia is just going to be able to trade directly with, in the end, Canada, North America, or anywhere that it can get sea lanes out to from the Arctic.
Yeah. Well, I would say that makes complete sense. If people haven't seen the building of this new maritime route, have a look on one of the video channels online, and you can find some very good documentary information, including the use of some very impressive icebreakers.
And nuclear-powered icebreakers, in fact. Well, look, the question that on everybody's lips has been, where, particularly in the United States, as we heard various allegations of special departments within the State Department, the Department of Defense, to decide on policy with respect to Russia and Ukraine. The question is, where's the policy coming from? So let's have a look at this. This is a document from 2019, published by the RAND Group, and it's called Extending Russia, Competing from Advantageous Ground. As the US National Defense Strategy recognizes, the United States is currently locked in a great power competition with Russia. This report, they say, seeks to define areas where the United States can compete to its own advantage. It examines Russian vulnerabilities and anxieties, analyzes potential policy options to exploit them, and assesses the associated benefits, costs, and risks, as well as the likelihood of successful implementation. So that was 2019, but this has been brought back to the surface by this article. RAND report prescribed US provocations against Russia, predicted Russia might retaliate in Ukraine. So this is Rick Sterling has written this. Many of the steps towards this war were proposed apparently in this report. So rather than trying to stay ahead or to improve the US domestically or in international relations, the emphasis is on efforts and actions to undermine the designated adversary, which is Russia. The report, he says, notes that Russia has deep-seated anxieties about Western. Well, let's just put that on screen. The report notes that Russia has deep-seated anxieties about Western interference and potential military attack. These anxieties are deemed to be a vulnerability to exploit. There's no mention of the cause of the Russian anxieties, that they've been invaded multiple times and had 27 million deaths in World War II. He goes on to highlight that the RAND report lists many techniques and measures to provoke and threaten Russia. Some of the steps include repositioning bombers within easy striking range of key Russian strategic targets, deploying additional tactical nuclear weapons in locations in Europe and Asia, increasing the US and allied naval forces posture and presence in Russia's operating areas (brackets Black Sea), holding NATO war exercises on Russia's borders, withdrawing from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. So this was all suggestions from RAND in 2019. These and many other provocations, Sterling says, suggested by RAND have in fact been implemented. For example, NATO conducted massive war exercises dubbed Defender 2021 right up to Russia's border. NATO has started patrolling the Black Sea and engaging in provocative intrusions into Crimean waters. The US has withdrawn from the INF Treaty. As earlier indicated, the RAND report assesses the costs and benefits of various US actions. It considered a benefit of increased US assistance to Ukraine results in the loss of Russian blood and resources. Speculating on the possibility of Russian troop presence in Ukraine, the report suggests it could become quite controversial at home, as it did when Soviets invaded Afghanistan. And he goes on to say the RAND report says increasing US military aid would certainly drive up Russian costs, but doing so could also increase the loss of Ukrainian lives and territory or result in a disadvantageous peace settlement. So peace settlements are disadvantageous. Brian, so there we go.
Well, I just wanted to add there that all of the things the RAND report has talked about and have happened, we've reported on in great detail, and we've said consistently that these activities are designed to provoke the Russians.
Yes, so before I ask for a comment here, I just also want to put this on screen. So this is SCSPI, which is a Chinese think tank, and they're talking about the situation in the South China Sea, and they publish a report it's an annual report called an incomplete report on US military activities in the South China Sea. So China absolutely seeing the same type of strategies that the Rand report is talking about with respect to Russia being also applied to China. So this is the South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative, and they have released their annual report as usual, and they're talking about just the level of U.S. military incursion into the South China Sea, for example. So of the 95 exercises for which there is publicly available information, 81 of them involve not only countries that border the South China Sea, but those from outside the region, including Japan, UK, Australia, India, France, China, and so that they're talking about just huge numbers of huge amounts of activity, extensive drills, new tactics as America aims to contain China, but is faced with the rapid development of the Chinese military, and so 1,200 aerial close-in reconnaissance sorties, 419 ship days of maritime survey and surveillance, and spy ships in the South China Sea is what they're talking about. So the same tactics, Alex, and are we to expect the same type of outcome at some point in the not-too-distant future?
It does look that way, doesn't it, Mike? The RAND Corporation is probably familiar to long-term viewers, but in a nutshell, it's an arm's length think tank for the US military. It thinks things aloud that wouldn't be thinkable within the Beltway. It sits in a more cosy and quieter setting and just lets its boffins dream how to evade mutually assured destruction and dream the control of a new world. And I'm not being bombastic there. There are interviews and whole books about the RAND Corporation where its history is described quite ebulliently in those terms. They're quite proud of the record that they have. All these disadvantageous things for Russia and the West that the bean counters sort of dispassionately stack up there. There's a couple of things that they've missed, such as the deliberate importing of head choppers and the importing of people who have no qualms, such as the local population might have about setting up torture chambers in basements, but that would all be part of the strategy, wouldn't it? I mean, we see now from Mariupol footage of torture chambers that have been found with jump leads and chains and all kinds of horrors. Very familiar from East Aleppo. But ultimately, the men who write these strategies, or an increasing number of women actually on board with them as well now, are fully cognizant that when you are talking about hemming in Russia more and more, you're actually also talking about looking the other way while some real nasties do your dirty work for you.
Yes. Vanessa, briefly, any thoughts on that?
No, although, because I'm just sort of putting a rather long article together right now showing the lead up to what happened and how perhaps COVID was used not only as a portal to the Great Reset, but also a portal to war against Russia. And going back to, I think it was 2016 or 17, there was a release of documents, STRATCOM, NATO, Ukraine interlopes, showing the potential for a color revolution in Russia. And of course, I mean, this all continues from Brzezinski's in 1997, the Great Chessboard, etc., etc. So this war has been coming for some time, and these plans have been set in stone for a number of years also. And I think that the trigger was the winning of the war in Syria, and Russia being propelled suddenly to the superpower that is the nemesis of the US and what they've been dreading and what they've been trying to prevent for decades. So yeah, I mean, really not surprising, and the RAND is really just repeating what came before, but of course the timing is very interesting, just before COVID kicked in March 2020.
Sure. Yep. Okay. Well, look. Let's just very briefly mention that sanctions continue to bite. So now Finland has suspended rail traffic with Russia, and so obviously people and goods not getting into Russia or vice versa from Finland at the moment. But Vanessa alluded to this earlier. Alex, this is the apparent arrest of the Orthodox priests in Ukraine.
This is in the town of Smela, or in Russian Smila, in Cherkasy region, and the one at the back in red is an acolyte. The one at the front being arrested has got the full priestly garb on. We don't know what the arrest is for, but it seems to be that the SBU, the intelligence service, is behind it. I don't think anyone else would authorise it. We have seen other scenes where churchgoers of the same church, the Moscow Patriarchy in Ukraine, effectively the largest church in the country, churchgoers in that church have been turfed out in the snow in the middle of a service. And of course it would be claimed by the SBU that these priests are involved in political machinations, but it's not the kind of thing that you have seen in the region again before. Even when Armenia and Azerbaijan have fought, people haven't been turfed out of places of worship while meetings have been going on. The background to this is that to this day, with the exception of a smaller so-called Ukrainian Orthodox Church that has little recognition and little membership, most Eastern Orthodox Ukrainians, so that's the bulk of the country, belong to a church which on paper is the Moscow Patriarchy. Only since 2018 it's been self-governing, autocephalous as they call it in theology. And this was celebrated only last year while I was in Ukraine, with the World Patriarch in Constantinople, a rather compromised pro-CIA figure, coming and posing alongside the new autocephalous head of the Ukrainian church. But this is not enough for the current Ukrainian authorities, and they are actually considering in the Rada at the moment, the Verkhovna Rada, the parliament, whether to outlaw the majority church in the country. Not to decree that its goods belong to the state and that it has to have a new head and a new constitution. They are planning to outlaw the equivalent of the Church of England. This doesn't seem to be getting any coverage in the West that I'm aware of.
Horrific, nevertheless. Well, perhaps we could draw people's attention back to media in the UK. UK Column News has warned over several years now of the activities of the BBC's charity, BBC Media Action. I want to bring the viewer back onto that subject to have a look at what we think is going on in the background. But let's have a look at how BBC Media Action present themselves. It's all very